So, ancient Mesopotamia. You've heard of the Babylonians. They wrote laws and looked at stars. Cute. But their neighbors to the north, the Assyrians, were a little different. They weren't just another Bronze Age empire squabbling over bits of fertile land. Oh no! The Neo-Assyrian Empire, starting around 911 BCE, decided to professionalize the art of being terrifying. They approached empire building with the cheerful enthusiasm of a tax audit and the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Their foreign policy was basically a subscription model. Pay your tribute on time, or they'd visit and permanently cancel your civilization. It wasn't mindless violence. That's the scary part. It was meticulously organized, state-sponsored, psychologically honed terror. They really put the art in tearing people apart. Before the Assyrians, warfare was largely a seasonal gig. You'd plant your crops, go fight a bit, then come home for the harvest. Then a guy named Tiglath-Pileser III came along in the mid-700s BCE and had a revolutionary thought. What if our army was an actual army all the time? He created one of the world's first professional standing armies. These weren't farmers with pointy sticks. These were full-time specialists in the business of conquest. This meant they could campaign year-round, which was just terrible news for everyone else. They developed specialized units, skilled archers, heavy infantry, and an engineering corps that could take apart a city like a puzzle box. Having a professional army means you can get very, very good at what you do. Unfortunately for the rest of the Middle East, what they did was conquer people. The Assyrians really shone when it came to siege warfare. Most armies of the day would see a big wall and just sort of wait. Maybe they'd try to starve the city out. The Assyrians saw a wall as a personal insult. They developed a whole toolkit for architectural disassembly. They had giant armored battering rams with names like the Roarer. They built enormous siege towers that could roll right up to the ramparts, allowing archers to shoot down on the defenders. If that didn't work, their engineers would just dig under the walls, a practice called sapping, to collapse them from below. The whole process was a masterpiece of psychological pressure. You'd be stuck in your city, watching this unstoppable machine of destruction being built just outside, knowing exactly what was coming. It was the ancient world's most stressful construction project. Once they conquered a place, the Assyrians made sure nobody would forget it. Their kings decorated their palaces with something called orthopedic reliefs. These were massive, incredibly detailed stone carvings covering the walls, and their favorite subject was, you guessed it, conquest. But these weren't just heroic battle scenes. They showed in graphic detail what happened to rebels. We're talking about reliefs of enemies being flayed alive, impaled on stakes outside their city gates, or having their tongues ripped out. When a visiting diplomat from a vassal state walked through these halls, they weren't just seeing art, they were seeing a warning. It was a public relations campaign designed to ensure compliance through sheer horror. Forget a strongly worded letter, the Assyrians sent a very, very strongly worded picture. You can't sustain an empire-sized protection racket without good administration. And the Assyrians were terrifyingly good at the boring stuff. They built an extensive network of royal roads, allowing their armies and messengers to move with unprecedented speed. Think of it as the first federal highway system, but its primary purpose was to deliver an army to your doorstep before you even finished planning your rebellion. Along these roads, they established supply depots and garrisons, a system called kalyu. This meant their army didn't have to live off the land, which tends to annoy the locals. Instead, they could arrive at full strength, well-fed, and ready to begin the impaling on schedule. It's the boring, brilliant logistics that made the spectacular horror possible. The Assyrians perfected mobile warfare. While others were still treating chariots like expensive taxis for nobles, the Assyrians turned them into heavy assault vehicles. They eventually moved to a three-man crew, a driver, an archer, and a shield-bearer to protect the other two. But their real innovation was cavalry. They were among the first major powers to use mounted soldiers effectively. Early on, it was tricky. Saddles and stirrups weren't really a thing yet, so they developed a buddy system. Pairs of riders, one controlling both horses while the other fired a bow. It's an adorably cooperative way to be a weapon of mass destruction. This gave them the ability to chase down fleeing enemies, scout vast territories, and deliver shock attacks that could shatter an infantry line. They had mastered the blitzkrieg a good 2,500 years early. Perhaps the most insidiously clever part of the Assyrian machine was their policy of mass deportation. When they conquered a rebellious kingdom, they would round up a huge chunk of the population, especially the skilled elites, and move them to a completely different part of the empire. The famous Lost 10 Tribes of Israel were victims of this policy. It wasn't just cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a calculated strategy with three brilliant evil benefits. 1. It shattered local identities and resistance. 2. It shuffled skilled labor around the empire to work on the king's grand construction projects. And 3. It created a multicultural mess of people who were less likely to unite against their Assyrian overlords. It was social engineering on a brutal, continental scale. So, with a system this brutally efficient, how did it all end? Well, it turns out that an empire built on fear needs an ever-increasing amount of fear to sustain itself. The constant wars were expensive. The sprawling empire was difficult to control. And, surprisingly, all the people they'd spent centuries oppressing really disliked them. A coalition of fed-up subjects, primarily the Babylonians from the south and the Medes from the east, saw an opportunity. Beginning in 626 BCE, they started chipping away at the empire. The final act came in 612 BCE, with the brutal sack of the capital, Nineveh. The masters of the siege found their own unbreakable walls broken. In a moment of supreme historical irony, nobody came to help them. They had spent so long ensuring they had no friends, only subjects, that when the end came, everyone else just brought popcorn. The Assyrian Empire was wiped from the map so thoroughly that Nineveh became a legend until it was rediscovered in the 19th century. But their military innovations echoed through history. Their siege techniques, their professional army structure, their use of cavalry, their logistical genius, it all became part of the standard textbook for future empire builders. The Persians, who followed them, adopted and adapted many of their administrative and military systems, though with a slightly more hearts and minds approach. Alexander the Great's combined arms tactics have whispers of Assyrian strategy. The Romans, with their engineering corps and professional legions, certainly would have nodded in approval. The Assyrians created a blueprint for empire that was both terrifyingly brutal and chillingly effective. They proved that if you're organized enough, you can make the whole world afraid of you. For a little while, anyway. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!